The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Tombstone, Arizona, where the crack of a leather whip cut through the afternoon air like a gunshot. A crowd had gathered in the town square, their faces a mixture of disgust and morbid curiosity as they watched the spectacle unfolding before them. Samuel Hartwell, a weathered man in his 50s with calloused hands and torn clothing, knelt in the dirt while Marcus Blackwood, the town's wealthiest cattle baron, raised his whip for another strike. Blood already stained Samuel's back through his shredded shirt, each lash a payment for the crime of being unable to settle his mounting debts. The onlookers whispered among themselves, some turning away in shame, while others seemed to relish the brutal display of power. Just as Blackwood's arm reached its peak, ready to deliver another punishing blow, a clear voice rang out across the square that would change everything. "Don't whip him, I'll buy him," declared the mysterious woman who had appeared seemingly from nowhere, her expensive silk dress and confident demeanor marking her as someone of considerable means and influence. Eleanor Whitmore stood tall despite being surrounded by dozens of rough frontier men, her emerald eyes blazing with determination as she faced down Marcus Blackwood. She was perhaps 30 years old, with auburn hair pinned elegantly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and her presence commanded attention in a way that seemed almost supernatural. The crowd fell silent, stunned by this unexpected intervention from a woman they had never seen before in their isolated desert town. Blackwood lowered his whip slowly, his cold gray eyes studying this newcomer with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. "You can call him worthless if you want," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying across the square with unwavering authority, "but I see a man of honor." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, causing murmurs to ripple through the assembled townspeople who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Samuel Hartwell raised his head from the dust, confusion and hope warring in his dark eyes, as he tried to understand why this elegant stranger would risk her reputation and safety to defend him. He had been a respected ranch foreman until a series of unfortunate events and poor investments had left him drowning in debt to Blackwood, who had been systematically destroying anyone who crossed him. The cattle baron had made Samuel's life a living hell, seizing his property, ruining his credit, and now demanding this public humiliation as final payment. But who was this woman, and what could she possibly want with a broken-down cowboy who had lost everything? Eleanor stepped closer to Blackwood, her boots clicking against the wooden planks of the raised platform where the whipping post stood, seemingly oblivious to the danger she was placing herself in by challenging the most powerful man in 3 counties. Blackwood's lips curved into a predatory smile as he studied Eleanor with renewed interest, his mind already working to determine her motives and how he might turn this situation to his advantage. $500, he announced loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear, and his debts transfer to you, along with all the consequences that come with them. The amount was astronomical by frontier standards, enough to buy a small ranch or establish a thriving business, yet Eleanor didn't even flinch at the figure. She reached into her leather satchel and withdrew a thick roll of bills, counting out the exact amount with practiced efficiency while the crowd watched in stunned silence. Samuel struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from blood loss and exhaustion, unable to comprehend why anyone would pay such a fortune for his worthless hide. As Eleanor handed over the money, her fingers briefly touched Samuel's shoulder, and he felt a strange electric sensation that seemed to flow through her touch, as if she possessed some kind of healing power that began to ease his pain immediately. The transaction completed, Eleanor helped Samuel to his feet with surprising strength for someone of her delicate appearance, supporting his weight as they prepared to leave the square. But Blackwood wasn't finished with his games, and his voice cut through the air once more with a warning that sent chills down the spines of everyone present. "You've made a dangerous enemy today, Miss Whitmore," he called out, somehow knowing her name despite never having met her before. Samuel noticed this detail immediately, filing it away as one of many mysteries surrounding his unlikely savior. Eleanor turned back to face Blackwood one final time, her expression calm but her eyes burning with an inner fire that suggested she was far more dangerous than her refined exterior indicated. "Perhaps," she replied coolly, "but I've faced worse monsters than you, Marcus Blackwood, and lived to tell the tale." The way she spoke his name, with intimate familiarity despite their apparent first meeting, sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. As Eleanor and Samuel made their way through the parting crowd toward the edge of town, curious eyes followed their every movement, and tongues began to wag with speculation about the mysterious woman's true identity and motives. Some claimed to have seen her arriving on the morning stagecoach, while others swore she had ridden into town alone on a magnificent black stallion that seemed to appear and disappear like smoke. Samuel found himself studying her profile as they walked, noting the determined set of her jaw and the way her hand rested casually on the pearl-handled revolver at her hip, suggesting she was no helpless damsel despite her refined appearance. They approached a modest boarding house on the outskirts of Tombstone, where Eleanor had apparently secured lodgings, though the proprietor seemed surprised to see her as if she had materialized from thin air without making proper arrangements. Inside Eleanor's rented room, Samuel finally found his voice as she tended to his wounds with supplies that seemed far too professional for a typical traveler. "Who are you really?" he asked, wincing as she applied antiseptic to the deepest lashes on his back. "And why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Eleanor paused in her ministrations, her hands stilling as she seemed to weigh how much truth she could safely reveal. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore," she began carefully, "and I've been tracking Marcus Blackwood for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to bring him to justice for crimes that go far beyond simple cruelty to debtors." Samuel turned to face her, ignoring the pain that shot through his back, his eyes searching her face for answers to questions he was only beginning to formulate. She continued applying bandages with practiced efficiency, explaining that Blackwood had destroyed her family's ranch in Colorado, killed her father in what was made to look like an accident, and stolen everything they had worked generations to build. Eleanor's story unfolded like a dark tapestry of revenge and justice, revealing that she was actually a former Pinkerton detective who had resigned from the agency when they refused to pursue Blackwood due to his political connections and vast wealth. She had spent years gathering evidence of his crimes, following a trail of ruined lives and mysterious deaths across 3 territories, all leading back to the man who now controlled most of Arizona's cattle trade through intimidation and murder. Samuel listened in amazement as she described narrow escapes from Blackwood's hired guns, late-night raids on document caches, and interviews with terrified witnesses who had seen their friends and family members disappear for crossing the cattle barren. Her quest for justice had consumed her life, turning her from a respected law enforcement officer into a wanted fugitive who had to stay one step ahead of both Blackwood's assassins and the corrupt officials he had bought throughout the region. The revelation that Eleanor had been watching Samuel for weeks added another layer of complexity to their relationship, as she explained that his mistreatment at Blackwood's hands had presented the perfect opportunity to get close to her target. She had seen in Samuel not just another victim, but a potential ally who knew Blackwood's operations from the inside and might hold the key to finally bringing the tyrant down. Samuel felt a mixture of gratitude and resentment at being used as a pawn in someone else's game, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward this remarkable woman who had literally saved his life. As night fell over Tombstone, Eleanor revealed her true plan, which went far beyond simple rescue or revenge and involved exposing a vast conspiracy that reached all the way to the territorial capital. She had evidence that Blackwood was not working alone, but was part of a network of corrupt businessmen and politicians who were systematically stealing land and resources from honest settlers throughout the Southwest. Samuel's role in Eleanor's plan became clear as she spread out maps and documents across the small table in her room, showing him property deeds, shipping manifests, and correspondence that painted a picture of massive fraud and conspiracy. His knowledge of Blackwood's ranch operations, combined with his access to areas that would be impossible for an outsider to reach, made him invaluable to her investigation. But the plan was dangerous beyond measure, requiring them to infiltrate Blackwood's inner circle and gather the final pieces of evidence needed to expose the conspiracy to federal authorities. Eleanor had already made contact with a federal marshal who was investigating similar crimes in neighboring territories, but she needed concrete proof of Blackwood's activities before any arrests could be made. Samuel realized that agreeing to help Eleanor would mean risking not just his own life, but potentially the lives of innocent people throughout the territory who had already suffered under Blackwood's reign of terror. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the boarding house, as 3 of Blackwood's hired guns appeared at Eleanor's door with orders to bring both her and Samuel to their boss immediately. Eleanor remained calm as she invited the men inside, offering them coffee while subtly positioning herself near her weapons and signaling Samuel to be ready for trouble. The lead gunman, a scarred brute named Jake Morrison, seemed nervous about confronting Eleanor directly, suggesting that word of her reputation had preceded her to Tombstone. She engaged them in casual conversation while secretly studying their movements and weapons, looking for any advantage she could use if the situation turned violent. Samuel watched in fascination as Eleanor smoothly deflected their questions about her intentions while gathering intelligence about Blackwood's current activities and the location of his main stronghold outside town. When it became clear that the gunmen weren't going to leave without their prisoners, Eleanor suggested they all ride out to meet Blackwood together, presenting herself as someone eager to negotiate a business arrangement rather than an enemy to be feared. Her confidence seemed to confuse the hired guns, who had expected resistance or attempts to flee, and they agreed to escort Eleanor and Samuel to Blackwood's ranch compound in the foothills outside Tombstone. During the ride, Eleanor managed to communicate with Samuel through subtle gestures and coded phrases, preparing him for what was likely to be a deadly confrontation with their nemesis. She had hidden weapons throughout her clothing and had given Samuel a small derringer that he kept concealed in his boot, though she hoped they could accomplish their mission through cunning rather than violence. Blackwood's ranch was a fortress-like compound surrounded by armed guards and positioned to control the main water sources for miles in every direction, a strategic location that gave him power over every rancher and farmer in the region. Eleanor studied the layout carefully as they approached, noting guard positions, escape routes, and potential weaknesses in the defenses that might prove useful later. The main house was an imposing structure that seemed designed more for intimidation than comfort, with gun ports instead of windows and a commanding view of the entire valley below. Samuel felt a chill of recognition as they passed through the gates, remembering his own visits to this place when he had still been trying to negotiate payment terms for his debts. Blackwood waited for them on the wide veranda, flanked by more hired guns, and wearing an expression of cold satisfaction as he watched his enemies ride into what he clearly intended to be a trap. The confrontation that followed revealed the true depth of Blackwood's paranoia and cruelty, as he accused Eleanor of being a government agent sent to destroy his legitimate business operations. He had done his own investigation into her background and knew about her connection to the Pinkerton agency, though he seemed unaware of the full extent of her evidence against him. Eleanor played her part perfectly, presenting herself as a fellow criminal who wanted to partner with Blackwood rather than oppose him, claiming that her purchase of Samuel had been a test to demonstrate her serious intentions. She spun an elaborate story about her own criminal enterprises in other territories and her desire to expand into Arizona under Blackwood's protection. Samuel watched in amazement as she gradually drew information from their captor, learning details about his operation that would be crucial to bringing him down. But Blackwood was not easily fooled, and his suspicions grew as Eleanor asked too many probing questions about his business partners and financial arrangements. The tension in the room became palpable as both sides maneuvered for advantage, with Eleanor trying to extract vital intelligence while Blackwood attempted to determine her true motives and capabilities. Samuel realized that their lives hung in the balance as Blackwood's hand moved closer to his weapon, and the hired guns positioned themselves to prevent any escape attempts. The cattle baron's patience finally snapped when Eleanor made a subtle reference to his activities in Colorado, revealing that she knew far more about his past than he had realized. The revelation that she was connected to his previous crimes transformed the atmosphere from tense negotiation to mortal combat, as Blackwood realized he was facing someone who posed an existential threat to his entire operation. The gunfight that erupted shattered the afternoon silence of the ranch compound, as Eleanor's hidden weapons appeared in her hands with lightning speed and Samuel dove for cover behind an overturned table. Bullets flew in every direction as the hired guns scrambled for position, their initial surprise giving Eleanor and Samuel a crucial advantage in the opening moments of the battle. Eleanor moved with the fluid grace of a trained professional, her shots finding their targets with deadly accuracy while she used furniture and architectural features for cover. Samuel discovered reserves of courage he didn't know he possessed, his derringer accounting for at least one of their attackers while he worked his way toward a rifle rack on the far wall. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley, alerting other ranch hands to the crisis and ensuring that reinforcements would soon arrive to tip the odds against the trapped pair. Eleanor's tactical skills became evident as she systematically eliminated threats, while working toward a predetermined escape route she had identified during their earlier reconnaissance. She coordinated their movements with hand signals, directing Samuel to cover positions that would provide maximum protection while she cleared obstacles from their path to freedom. Blackwood himself had taken cover behind a massive oak desk, occasionally emerging to fire wild shots that revealed his panic and desperation as his carefully laid trap collapsed around him. The hired guns who had seemed so confident earlier now found themselves outmatched by opponents who had clearly prepared for this confrontation far more thoroughly than they had anticipated. Eleanor's years of training and experience showed as she maintained her composure under fire, making every shot count while conserving ammunition for the running battle that was sure to follow. The breakthrough came when Eleanor managed to reach a window that overlooked the compound's main courtyard, giving her a vantage point to spot approaching reinforcements and plan their next move accordingly. She signaled Samuel to join her at the window, where they could see at least a dozen armed men rushing toward the main house from various buildings around the ranch. Their only chance of survival lay in reaching the horses they had spotted tied near the compound's rear gate, but the path would take them through open ground where they would be exposed to gunfire from multiple directions. Eleanor produced a small bundle of dynamite from her satchel, explaining in hurried whispers that she had come prepared for various contingencies, including the need to create a major distraction. Samuel watched in admiration and terror as she lit the fuse and hurled the explosive toward the ranch's ammunition storage shed, knowing that the resulting explosion would either provide the cover they needed or bring the entire building down on their heads. The dynamite blast exceeded even Eleanor's expectations, setting off a chain reaction that destroyed not only the ammunition shed but also ignited a fuel depot that sent flames shooting high into the sky. The explosion scattered Blackwood's men and created enough chaos and confusion to allow Eleanor and Samuel to make their desperate dash for the horses through the smoke and debris. Burning fragments rained down around them as they ran, their ears ringing from the massive detonation that had shaken the entire compound to its foundations. Eleanor had grabbed a satchel of documents from Blackwood's desk during the confusion, evidence that would prove crucial to exposing the full extent of his criminal enterprise to federal authorities. Samuel helped her onto her horse while fighting off the last of the hired guns who had managed to maintain pursuit through the smoke and flame, his rifle now providing covering fire as they prepared to flee the devastated compound. Their escape from Blackwood's ranch became a harrowing chase across the rugged Arizona landscape, with the cattle barons surviving men in hot pursuit despite the massive damage to their base of operations. Eleanor led them through terrain she had scouted during her weeks of surveillance, taking advantage of hidden canyons and rocky passages that would slow their pursuers and provide opportunities for ambush if necessary. Samuel found himself developing a grudging respect for Eleanor's planning and preparation, realizing that she had anticipated almost every aspect of their confrontation and planned accordingly. The stolen documents in her satchel represented years of meticulous record-keeping by Blackwood, detailing bribes paid to officials, land frauds perpetrated throughout the territory, and connections to criminal organizations as far away as San Francisco and Denver. As night fell over the desert, Eleanor and Samuel took refuge in a hidden cave she had discovered during her reconnaissance, where they could tend their wounds and plan their next moves without fear of immediate discovery. The documents they had stolen revealed the scope of Blackwood's conspiracy in shocking detail, implicating territorial judges, federal land office officials, and even members of Congress in a systematic scheme to steal millions of acres of public land. Eleanor explained that she had been building a case that would require federal intervention, as local authorities were either bought off or too intimidated to act against such powerful interests. Samuel realized that his role in Eleanor's mission had evolved from simple ally to crucial witness, as his first-hand knowledge of Blackwood's operations would be essential to corroborating the documentary evidence they had obtained at such great risk. The revelation of Samuel's true identity provided the final twist that neither Eleanor nor the audience had anticipated, as he confessed that he was actually Samuel Hartwell Morrison, the younger brother of Jake Morrison, one of the gunmen they had killed during their escape from Blackwood's compound. His family had been among Blackwood's earliest victims in Colorado, losing their ranch to fraudulent debt schemes before Samuel had changed his name and tried to start over in Arizona. He had deliberately gotten into debt with Blackwood as part of his own quest for revenge, planning to destroy the cattle baron from within his organization until Eleanor's intervention had changed everything. The brothers had been on opposite sides of the conflict without knowing it, a tragic irony that highlighted the widespread destruction Blackwood had caused throughout their region. Samuel's insider knowledge of both Blackwood's operations and the criminal network surrounding him proved invaluable in understanding the stolen documents and planning their final confrontation with the conspiracy. Eleanor's response to Samuel's revelation showed the depth of her character, as she immediately understood the pain he must be feeling over his brother's death while recognizing the strategic value of his unique position. Together they developed a plan that would use Samuel's supposed death in the ranch explosion to allow him to move freely while Eleanor presented their evidence to federal authorities in the territorial capital. The scheme required careful coordination and perfect timing, as they would have only one chance to expose the conspiracy before Blackwood and his allies could silence them permanently. Samuel's knowledge of his brother's criminal contacts proved crucial in understanding how Blackwood recruited and controlled his hired guns, many of whom were desperate men driven to violence by the same economic pressures that had nearly destroyed Samuel himself. The journey to the territorial capital became a race against time, as Eleanor and Samuel worked to stay ahead of Blackwood's manhunt while gathering additional evidence and witnesses to support their case. They discovered that the cattle baron had already begun covering his tracks, eliminating potential witnesses and destroying records that might implicate his political allies. Eleanor's contacts within the federal government proved crucial in arranging a meeting with officials who had the authority and jurisdiction to act on their evidence. But the process was complicated by the web of corruption that Blackwood had woven throughout the territorial administration. Samuel's presumed death provided him with the freedom to move unseen through areas where Eleanor would be recognized and hunted, allowing him to gather testimony from surviving victims of Blackwood's various schemes. The final confrontation took place not in another gunfight, but in the marble halls of the federal courthouse, where Eleanor presented her evidence to a grand jury that had been secretly assembled to investigate territorial corruption. Samuel's testimony, delivered from behind a screen to protect his identity, provided the human element that transformed abstract documents into a compelling narrative of systematic criminal enterprise. Blackwood himself was arrested while attempting to flee the territory with a fortune in stolen gold, his political allies abandoning him as soon as the scope of the federal investigation became apparent. The cattle baron's network of corruption collapsed like a house of cards once key witnesses realized that cooperation with authorities offered their only hope of avoiding lengthy prison sentences. Eleanor's vindication came not just through Blackwood's conviction, but through the restoration of her family's stolen property and the clearing of her name with the Pinkerton Agency, which offered to reinstate her with a promotion and expanded authority. Samuel found himself faced with choices he had never imagined, as the territorial government offered him a position as a federal marshal, while Eleanor suggested they continue working together to expose similar conspiracies throughout the frontier regions. The woman who had saved him from a whipping post had become his partner in bringing justice to a lawless land, their relationship evolving from desperate alliance to deep respect and affection. Blackwood's ranch was sold at public auction, with the proceeds going to compensate his many victims, while the man himself disappeared into the federal prison system to serve a sentence that would keep him locked away for the rest of his natural life. The epilogue of their adventure found Eleanor and Samuel 6 months later, working together as federal agents assigned to investigate territorial corruption throughout the Southwest, their partnership having proven so effective that they were given broad authority to pursue justice wherever it might lead them. The boarding house in Tombstone had been replaced by a proper office in the territorial capital, though they still spent most of their time traveling from town to town, following leads and building cases against corrupt officials and criminal organizations. Samuel had learned to appreciate Eleanor's meticulous planning and professional approach to law enforcement, while she had come to value his intuitive understanding of frontier life and his ability to connect with ordinary people who had been victimized by powerful interests. Their reputation had spread throughout the territory, causing criminals to flee rather than face the investigative team that had brought down the seemingly untouchable Marcus Blackwood. The transformation of both characters from their first meeting in Tombstone's dusty square represented more than personal growth, but reflected the changing nature of the frontier itself as federal law gradually replaced the arbitrary rule of local strongmen. Eleanor's decision to save Samuel from the whipping post had seemed like an impulsive act of mercy, but had actually been the culmination of years of careful planning and preparation that had finally reached its crucial moment. Samuel's journey from broken debtor to federal marshal demonstrated the possibilities for redemption and transformation that existed even in the harsh realities of frontier life, where second chances were rare and usually had to be earned through courage and determination. Their partnership had become a symbol of justice triumphant over corruption, proof that even the most powerful criminals could be brought to account when dedicated individuals were willing to risk everything for what was right. The legacy of their confrontation with Blackwood continued to resonate throughout the territory long after the cattle baron's imprisonment, as other victims of corruption found the courage to come forward and demand justice from authorities who could no longer ignore their pleas. Eleanor and Samuel's methods had proven that systematic investigation and careful documentation could be more effective than gunfights and vigilante justice in bringing lasting change to frontier communities. Their story had become legend in towns throughout Arizona and Colorado, inspiring other law enforcement officers and giving hope to ordinary citizens who had previously felt powerless against corrupt local officials. The woman who had interrupted a public whipping with 5 simple words had demonstrated that individual courage, properly applied, could indeed change the world for the better.